if I'm giving parents advice, kind of, then the quote would be, Nike, just do it. You've got to, for a lot of families, they don't know where to start, and there is no official way to start, but go visit a couple colleges, go to my website, start listening to some podcasts. It's a process. It's not something you're going to figure out on one Sunday afternoon. It's going to be many Sunday afternoons of dealing with colleges and visits and testing and working with your school counselors. And the sooner you start, the more spread out it can be and the less stressful it will be.
Step into the world of success with Your Brand Amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success.
Now, today we're going to get into a slightly different topic, but one that I know is very relevant to a lot of my audience. Some of you have little children. Some of you might not have children yet. You're thinking about it. Others of you, like myself, have students who are in high school, and we're actively looking at universities and trying to figure out the nuances with all of the things that Brad Baldridge brings to the table. Brad, you are a certified financial planner. You have a podcast on taming the high cost of college. You have so many resources as I'm looking through your website, your LinkedIn, that are available that you offer as a service and a gift to parents, as well as, of course, your paid services and everything else you do. So I just want to thank you for being here and unraveling some of the nuances behind something that, as parents, we can think of as very complex and aren't really sure which way to go.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited that you're here. Now, you are a financial advisor. You're an owner of Baldridge Wealth Management. You also have Baldridge College Solutions. So I want to learn, what was that point when you realized there was a huge need in the market and that this was a huge area of opportunity for something you had expertise in?
Right. 15, 18 years ago now, I don't remember the exact date, when I started dabbling in college planning, and then I launched the podcast and got more deeply involved. I mean, it was kind of a progression. I still do financial advising and still work with families on their general financial planning, but most of the people I'm working with now also have some college component on top of an inheritance or on top of retirement or all their other things. So yeah, and as I started providing more information and services, more and more people would seek me out. So it's like, oh, I think I found something here. And I just kind of have been delving into it deeper and deeper for the last 10 or 12 years for sure.
Wow. Well, kudos for being a podcaster from the early days.
Yes.
Not many people can say that.
Exactly.
Did this come out of personal experience of you having to navigate this area, or did it come out of you had clients who started having children that were that age and they needed that extra service, and then you went, wow, this could be a whole other side, a whole other business?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my early college planning was definitely not because of what was going on with me. Since then, I now have one in high school and two in college. So now I am definitely eating my own cooking. But 15 years ago, it was, college was well in the future when I first got started. But yes, it was very much my clients where, college was starting to become more expensive. And, for those of us that, lived through, the early 2000s and so forth, when college wasn't that bad, but it was on this trajectory where it was getting more and more expensive very quickly. And then about 2007, 2008 is when that the graduates in that time frame during the recession had a tough time finding work. And all of a sudden, the high loans and the low employment and the low wages kind of came together. And all of a sudden, there was a lot of unhappy students out there that were told, all you have to do is go to college and life will be, life will be great. It'll solve all your problems, which was perhaps true up until then. But that was kind of the first real reckoning where all of a sudden there was lots of people out there saying, it's just not worth it. I have all this debt and all these high payments, but my income isn't strong enough to support all this. And now it's, much more nuanced where, again, prices have gone up since then. And now very many families is it worth it? And how do I make it work and all that type of thing.
Yeah. I'm in a very specific place right now where I teach university, but I'm also getting my MBA with a specialty in AI and ML. And then I have a daughter who's a junior who, her top two choices right now are overseas. So we'll definitely get into that. But I want to understand for people who are business owners, right? That because you have to give your financial information. I know there's a lot more to the process to get to this point that we won't cover today just due to time. And I really want to get into these areas of your specialty. So
Right.
what are some things that you see as the biggest hurdles or the biggest, like people don't know where to turn? They don't know quite how to answer certain questions. What should they be
Right.
thinking of before they get to that point so that when they have to turn over parents' financials, they look like they're in a better position to get
Right.
maybe financial aid scholarships?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So need-based aid is one piece of the college planning puzzle that lots of people focus on because most people have at least heard of the FAFSA, are familiar with it. Maybe they did a FAFSA when they went to college 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So it's pretty ubiquitous for people that got their own education here in the States where they understand generally, you have to fill out these forms, put your income and assets and all your financial information on it. And then based on that, you may qualify for need-based aid. And that can be a big piece of the puzzle for some families, or many of the families I work with ultimately don't qualify at all for need-based aid directly. So then there's also merit aid and saving and investing and a lot of other ways to pay for college on top of need-based aid. But when it comes to the need-based aid process, what's interesting for entrepreneurs, right? If you have that good accountant and you go to them and you say, well, what do you want your income to say, right? The accountant can kind of potentially include or exclude things or do whatever needs to be done and shift income and do things and say, well, we can bring your income down or we can bring it up depending on what makes sense. And then when it comes to need-based aid, lower income is better. But I think the challenge for most entrepreneurs is, well, yeah, if I make it low this year, it's because I pushed income into next year or I shifted it somewhere else. So you need to look at the multi-year impact of shifting income. But for a lot of families, it makes a lot of sense where, if we push it one way or the other, maybe we'll get a little more aid, or maybe we can get a little bit better tax breaks. I had a family a few years ago where there's a tax credit that phases out between 160 and 180,000 of income. So they were at like 182. They were able to bring their income down by putting more into their retirement plans in their business, and they brought it down to 160. So they were able to get the tax credit, which is $2,500 times 2 kids. So that was $5,000 of benefit. Plus, they also got the deductions for putting money into retirement. That was another $6,000 or $7,000. So by putting 20 some into retirement, they were able to save $13,000-14,000 in taxes.
Wow. Yeah,
Of course, they had 2 kids in college, so they didn't really have extra money.
Right.
So then they were able to borrow that money back out of the plan and still use it for college.
Interesting.
Now, did Brad just say spend your retirement on college? No, I did not. As part of a bigger plan, though, if you have these opportunities, and again, that's where the business ownership and when you have more complex tax life and a more complex income and assets, and the bad news is you have to hire accountants and you got to spend time figuring it all out. The good news is now you can perhaps use it to your advantage when you're applying for loans, when you're pursuing college aid and those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. The retirement and college planning is definitely an issue I want to get into. But I'm just thinking, so this could also be an issue for businesses that might be looking for future funding, right? If they're at the kind of business that will look for VC funding or business loans to grow their business. Because in those cases, you want to be able to show some profitability, maybe higher income. Yeah, so there's a lot of push-pull there. Is there a checklist that you utilize to help people kind of figure out what the best strategy is?
Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of the business owners I'm working with, have their mortgages in place and they're not necessarily trying to keep their income high, and they have that opportunity. And it doesn't work for everyone either, where it's like, yeah, you can bring your income down. And it's kind of a caution, right? Is if you bring your income down, it doesn't automatically mean you're going to get more aid.
Right.
It has to be the right school and the right situation. I've seen situations where we do the math, let's say a private school, and let's say you need $35,000. And the school offers you $30,000. I say, well, we realize you need 35, but we can only offer you 30. Now, had you worked hard and brought it to where now you need 45,000, a lot of times the answer is the same thing. Well, we agree you need 45, but all we can offer you is 30. So it didn't matter that you went through the hoops and adjusted your need-based aid. Now, on the flip side of that, if you look at Stanford, they put out a press release a couple of years ago that said if your AGI, your adjusted gross income, which is your income on your taxes, is under 100,000, then Stanford is free. They will cover all of room and board and all of tuition. And if your income is between 100,000 and 150,000, then they will still cover all of tuition, but you may have to pay some room and board. So families in that and those incomes, Stanford would be a low-cost option for many families.
Not easy to get into.
Exactly. That's the big challenge, right? While it might be, the cost might be great, getting accepted is, you need to have that rock star in order to get accepted. So it may not work out. But there's other schools that are, that are similarly generous that aren't quite as competitive. But yes, so another example of if you have that high achieving student, you have more opportunities, but you also have more work to do to understand how those opportunities work and which ones will work for you.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so much nuance there. You mentioned Stanford, and that is a question I had because I think it does relate directly to when you're thinking about financials. A lot of families might not apply to certain schools because of the sticker price, even though that might not be the actual price, right? I mean, I work for a nonprofit educational foundation. We have an online private school for middle school and high school kids. We have a sticker price, which is still lower than most private schools, but 90% of our students get some kind of scholarship. So they're not actually paying, right? So is that one thing that you also take into consideration when you're helping families plan
Right.
strategies and once you see what colleges they get into or universities?
Yes, absolutely. So, right. So there's the list price of colleges, which is called cost of attendance, and it's tuition, room and board, books, fees, beer, and pizza. It's the whole cost of a typical student for 1 year. And Stanford is in the 92,000 range, and a lot of state schools. I mean, in California, they've got 2 tiers of state schools. You got the UC schools that are 35-ish and the state schools that are 25, 28. But the average state school now is about 28,000. And that, again, that's everything: tuition, room and board, books, and fees. The average private school is more like 58 or 60,000 now. And that's average. There's some that are lower than that. And then, as we mentioned, the highest, most expensive schools are more than 90. I haven't heard any of them cross 100 yet, but some of them are getting relatively close. So in another year or two, it's likely to happen.
Wow. So when families are looking at those schools, should they let that price affect where they apply or not? Because I know there's different schools of thought for even going through the application process and paying those extra fees to apply to a university.
Right. So that's the price, right? The list price. What everybody really needs to understand is what is the net price. And that's one of the challenges that most families have is if you're going to qualify for need-based aid and or merit aid, that brings the price down. And it could bring it down to where it's kind of like shopping for a car, except what you don't know is at some car dealerships, there's a 50% off or a 70% off coupon, but you don't know until you go to the dealership and talk to the salesman and test drive the car and really get into it. And then at the very end of the process, they'll say, oh, well, based on your finances and how, what your students like, here's your coupon. And all of a sudden you go, oh, wow, I can get a Porsche for the cost of a Chevy. I didn't even realize it. But that's, what's going on is some of these high price schools won't be high priced at the end. Some of them will. And it depends on your student grades and test scores and how strong of a student they are. And it also depends on the family finances. So one of the things that I help families do is figure out that whole pricing and how it works ahead of time so that you kind of know what's going on before you put them on the list. And it's not perfect. We don't know exactly what it's going to cost, but we have some ideas. As an example, I've had people come to me and say, well, my student is so smart and they're brilliant and they got accepted to all these schools, including, say, Stanford or Harvard or whatever, and then they'll say, but a couple of these schools didn't give us any merit aid, right? And they're asking us to pay full price. But this school over here gave us a $30,000 scholarship and it's so much less. And it's like, well, yeah, that school never gives merit aid. So you shouldn't be surprised. You should know that school was going to be full price because your income is high and you can afford to pay. Therefore, a Harvard or a Stanford is going to ask you to pay. And on the other end of that spectrum, if you can afford Harvard or Yale, they've got so much aid available that it will probably be a very, fair price for most people. As I mentioned, it's free if your income's under 100,000. So you can't be free most of the time. Yeah. So, and that's the challenge, is that's how the elite schools work. And the state schools work differently, and the out-of-state state schools work different than that. And some privates are, so there's these different buckets. And, on my website, I've got 6 types of colleges that kind of helps you understand the different buckets, how it works. We've got a need-based aid calculator where you can go in and calculate what your SAI is, which if you're not familiar with SAI, that's a new term. It used to be called EFC, or expected family contribution. They revamped the system a couple of years ago, and expected family contribution has changed over to student aid index. It's a very similar calculation, but they changed the name because EFC was confusing in some instances. So as they revamped it a couple of years ago, they changed some names, changed, the process a little bit. But yeah, it's all out there, you certainly can calculate it. And I also have the average net price by income for a lot of colleges. So you can go to find the California schools and see what their average net price is and kind of use that as a place to start. What I always tell people is these are averages and you're not average. So your number could be better or worse, but at least it's a place to start for some families.
Yeah. I have friends who, their kid might have gotten into a university outside of their state, but they said, hey, if you stay here and you go to this other school you got accepted to, you're going to be debt free and we'll give you the money, perhaps if they have money saved for college, right, that they're not using, they'll give that to them for their kids' start as an adult, or there might be other benefits. That's one thing that I wonder is if it's still advantageous to go to, a higher price school, or is it more important if it meets your passion or not? And then the other question that weighs on me is about just untangling this whole thing about, 529 plans. And if you've saved money, should you save money for 529 plans? And can you use it in any school, even if it's outside the United States? And then the third, there's like all these different issues that I think are really important for us to think about and consider as parents.
Right. Yes. So that the is it worth it issue, go back to buying a car, right? So you're driving down the road one day with a bunch of people in your car and somebody drives up in a very expensive, fancy looking sports car, and somebody in the, that you're riding with says, oh, look at that expensive car over there. It's not worth it. And that's crazy to spend that kind of money on a car. Yet the guy driving it thought it was a great idea to buy the car. He bought it. Okay. So, so for a lot of families, it's a decision of, well, we earned the money and we're going to spend it on something. So we're going to spend our money on college instead of sports cars, instead of the lake home, instead of exotic vacations. Now, I think where it gets challenging is when people are, really getting themselves into a financial hole. If you're borrowing tons of money to pay for college, because then maybe an alternative would be better. But if you're giving up the lake home to spend money on college, that's your decision. And while people will probably judge you, I don't think they should be, right? I mean, that's your choice to spend your money how you want. And for most people, is it worth it is a kind of a personal decision. And then you get into what's the rate of return on this investment and all that kind of stuff, which again, a lot of those calculations are relatively bogus because it's based on averages. And again, your student's not average. I've had many parents say, this particular school changed my life or changed my kid's life because this happened. And that particular professor took a interest in my life, or I had this opportunity and it helped out. Would that opportunity have been available at a different school? Maybe, or maybe it would have been a completely different path.
Yeah.
You'll never know for sure. But I think one of the bad things that has happened when the politicians said college for everybody, I think that kind of distorted things, and that had everybody clamoring to go to school. And if you didn't go to college, you were, on the road to failure automatically. And I think what really needs to be said is everybody needs an education. For some people, that education is college. For some people, it's the school of hard knocks. For some people, it's, online or apprenticeships or the military, or there's lots of ways to get an education, and there's no right or wrong. It's a long answer to, is it worth it? But the answer is sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. Yeah. And sometimes you'll never know for sure because you can only pick one path and you won't know what the other path would have turned out to be.
True. Yeah. Yeah, that's very fair because we do have one path. And I think what I'm hearing is that apply to the schools that your child's really dreaming of, see what they get into. And then again, go back and assess, are there opportunities based on what you hear from other parents, what you review, if you've visited campus and your students met other students, what companies students get in, become employees at afterwards, or there are so many metrics that you can look at to really evaluate, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of examples that I can give. Like I've had students that were interested in physics, and he said, these are the schools I want to go to because they have this particular kind of telescope, and at these colleges, you can actually use it as an undergrad. And had done all kinds of research. He was well on his way. I was pretty sure that kid was going to be successful no matter what. He was driven, he was fine. On the other hand, we have parents say things like, well, if I don't help them and push them to apply and stuff, they're probably not going to go because they're just not going to get their stuff together. And it's like, well, if you have to push them to go and that kind of stuff, then maybe you don't push them to an expensive school. Maybe, then maybe community college is a place to start, or the local state school, and see how it goes, and then go from there. So, yeah, that's the other challenge, right? Is the advice needs to be tailored to this family and to the student, right? Because there's a chunk of students out there that are going to be successful pretty much no matter what they do. Yeah. They can take any major, they can go to any college, and they're going to figure it out. And, and if you look at a lot of adults, right? They'll have a degree in one thing and they'll have a very successful career completely unrelated to the major that they took.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? So, well, how did that happen? Well, most people, or a lot of people, have that hard left turn in their career path somewhere, and they didn't see it coming. Now, if you talk to them about it, they don't regret the fact that many times, they don't look back and say, I shouldn't have done that because it helped me become who I am. And then, when I saw the opportunity to make that left turn, I took it because I was who I was at the time. If I hadn't gone to the college, maybe I wouldn't have done that. And again, we'll never know because of the one path challenge. But so we've got the kids out there that'll be very successful. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got the kids that, again, lots of people drop out of college. The latest statistic I heard was like 30 or 40% of kids don't finish their degree. Well, for a lot of those kids, college was an expense that didn't generate a lot of benefit. And if we can figure out how to avoid that, that would be fantastic. That's, to have 2 or 3 years of college under your belt, lots of debt and no degree doesn't make a lot of sense for most kids. And then there's the kids in the middle where if we do the right things, it might push them ahead. And if we do the wrong things, it might drag them down. I think that's the challenge, is recognizing, well, where are we in this process and what's important? And, our goal is to raise, successful, happy kids. And college might be the path, but there are alternatives, and for a large chunk of the world, that is the path, right? If you want to be an engineer or a nurse or a teacher or a lot of them, degree is essentially required. If you want to be a musician, do you have to go to college? Probably not. Certainly a lot of the most successful musicians never did. On the flip side, an orchestra or something like that might have a lot of classically trained college graduates in it. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so what are you looking to be? Are you looking to be the rock star? Or are you looking to play trombone in the local symphony?
Yeah.
Right. change your path. And then, of course, a lot of kids don't know where they're going when they're just starting out. Another big challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. It is an advantage for me that my daughter's known what she wants to do since she was 12. So it made it very easy to say, okay, let's cool down the list of schools that we're going to look at more deeply. We've been able to do tours, fine tune even more, and see where we're at, and because we have to start applying the end of the summer, basically, for some of the schools she's looking at. And so these things are also very present of mind for me. And that takes us to the 529. If a child has a 529 plan that's pretty well funded, does that also affect financial aid? Can you use that plan? And I know you just did a whole series on this that I haven't listened to yet on your podcast, so I'll have to go back. So it was a multi-part series. But just for this podcast, what are some of the nuances people need to think about with 529s? Is it only able to be used in the United States? Can you use it in other countries? Like, how does it affect financial aid and all the other considerations that you put into the school that you and your children ultimately choose?
Right. Yeah. So the big benefit of 529s is tax breaks federally. So it can grow tax deferred and you can take it out tax free if you spend it on college. And also many states, if you use the plan in your home state, you also get some state tax benefits or bonuses of some sort.
Okay.
So it is generally good if you end up spending it on college. Now, if you don't spend it on college, you have to pay taxes and penalties, and that's generally not good. So a lot of parents of a 2 or 4-year-old are saying, well, we don't know if college is going to happen or not. So they're a little hesitant to put lots of money into the 529, which is legitimate. As you get closer and it becomes more real, or if you have lots of kids and you're saying, well, one of them's going to go to college, maybe I don't know which one yet, but there's a good, pretty comfortable saving sum, great. And then when you actually get, to middle school or high school where it becomes clearer, then you can perhaps ramp it up a little bit. But yeah, I think 529s definitely are a benefit, but they're not the only way. There's alternatives. I've paired it with other investments that are not necessarily dedicated strictly to college. So you have flexibility as well. But I would say, 80 or 90% of the time, some 529s will make sense. Again, unless and I don't talk to a lot of families that are in the situation of, well, my kids are not going to college. That's because, obviously, there's a bias there of the people that I'm talking to are going to college. That's why I'm talking to them. So we do use a lot of 529s, but it isn't the only solution out there. And a lot of times you will combine it with other solutions. As far as can I use it overseas? Well, that's a little more complicated. It is not a qualified withdrawal generally, but there are schools that are foreign schools that are on the U.S. federal financial aid system, which means you can apply for financial aid through the FAFSA. Wow. And generally you're not going to get grants that you can use, but you might be able to use student loans and you might be able to use 529.
Interesting.
So the answer is maybe.
Maybe, yeah.
And then there's certainly a lot of U.S. schools now that have a study abroad arm or sister school. As I mentioned, I've got a daughter in high school, and she's looking at a college where they have a satellite campus in Rome, I think it is, where a lot of the faculty will go over there and teach, so you can get courses in your major at that location because they'll send faculty over there pretty regularly to teach the various majors. And, so they have a large number of students there. So they send faculty, and it's more coordinated versus just showing up at some foreign college and trying to transfer credits back to your home school.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, one of the things that you did mention earlier was retirement plans and how some families are having to go into retirement plans to invest in their children's education. And you said that you don't necessarily recommend it. So I'd love to hear a little bit about when you would recommend it versus when you wouldn't, and what are the pitfalls?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so I have had parents, as an example, who were older and said, well, I could put money into my retirement plan because I'm going to be 62 when my kid goes to college, which makes me over the 59 and a half rules that most retirement plans have. So I actually can take money out of my retirement to pay for college. So, and then they intentionally put more into retirement so that they would have it available to take it out. That's a lot different than I didn't plan very well. I'm not really on track for retirement. but I also have college, and now I'm going to take my retirement funds and spend them on college, and now I'm going to in an even worse retirement situation. That's bad, obviously. But if it's part of a bigger plan, retirement plans are a tool, 529s and other investments are a tool, mutual fund, and there's all kinds of different tools, and use the right tools for the right jobs. And it should work out pretty well. Where I get frustrated and where I see families really blow things up is when we didn't know what it was going to cost. We didn't plan very well. We applied to an expensive school. The bill came and I was like, oh my God, how are we going to pay it? We didn't see it coming. And then we had to take $50,000 out of our retirement. And then we were shocked to learn that we had to pay taxes and penalties on that. And it really hurt. And, that's the poor planning that I see occasionally where, family, again, if you do the planning well, there's lots of great ways to pay for school. And it makes sense for some families to do it one way versus, how other families would do it. But generally rating retirement is not a good alternative because of the high cost and taxes and penalties and other things. So if you can avoid it, you're probably better to go on a different path.
Yeah. Because you mentioned that there are various investment strategies, saving strategies. If somebody is starting to put a little bit of money away in an account, maybe it's not their retirement account, it's not a 529 plan, they're not going to make a lot of money or let it grow if it sits in savings. So what are some other kinds of accounts that you would have them consider? And of course, there's a lot more information on your website because we don't have time to get into everything. I think that could be, a week-long seminar you give.
Right.
Just to even still be touching the surface.
Right, exactly. So if you think about investing in general, you've got your core investments, right? You've got stock accounts, bond accounts, and cash type accounts. So you can put money in the bank, you can put money in bond accounts, you can put money in stock accounts, or you can blend those things together. And those types of accounts are available in our 401k, they're available for our IRA, they're available for 529s, and generally they're mutual funds or ETFs or, and they're reasonably diversified and they're all very similar, right? And what rate of return do they get? Well, if you put it in a stock type of account, it's going to get stock-like returns. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, et cetera. If you put it in a bond type, you're going to get bond returns. If you get a mix, you'll get the mix. But then the next question is, you can have that exact same investment inside an IRA. That's for retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's the 59.5 rule and penalties if you take it out early and taxes work a certain way. But your rate of return is the same as what it would be if that same investment was inside a 529 or that same investment was inside a trust or inside an annuity. So we've got the core investment and then we have the wrappers that are around it. And the wrappers around it could be 529, IRA, 401k, trusts, annuities, and lots of other things. And get very complicated, right? My corporation owns a trust that owns an annuity that owns a stock fund.
Yeah.
Or I just went out and bought a stock fund directly and I own it personally. So it can be simple, it can get complex. But that's kind of the core of most families investing of some of this money is for retirement. Some of this money is for college. Some of this money is for emergencies. Some of this money hasn't been allocated yet. It's just kind of a reserve that we're thinking we'll kick it over to college if we need it, but we're not sure if we're going to college yet.
Yeah.
Or we could kick it over to vacation, but we're not sure where we're going on vacation yet. But to put some numbers on it, when we get to college, I often see families with 2 or 3 kids and we do the math and it's like, okay, well, we need to save $2,500 a month, or we need to save $4,000 a month, or we need to save $500 a month. So it can be some relatively big numbers depending on your goals and how much you've already saved, or we need to save $3,000 a month. But if we were willing to take that $100,000 that was in a slush fund just growing and if we apply that to college, then your $3,000 a month becomes $1,200 a month. Oh, okay. Well, that, kind of makes sense then. Then that's what we'll do. Or we'd rather do the monthly and repurpose this 100,000 back into the business because we have a growth opportunity or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I think that's where in general, when you're an entrepreneur, you've got a lot of levers to pull there and you've got college going on and you've got different schools, starting early and starting to think about this, freshman, sophomore year so that you can start thinking about, well, where's the money going to come from? And if you start a year or two earlier, instead of being $3,000 a month, maybe it's $2,200 a month because you've got a couple more years to get going on it.
Yeah.
And you also can then plan a little bit and say, well, you know what? 2028 is an important year that I want to keep my income low. So I'll push income into 27 and push income into 29 and try and keep 28 the best it can be. But if you're not talking about that in 26 or 25, a lot of times it's too late. It's like, well, this is what we should have done. And it's important to realize that financial aid looks back 2 years. So you mentioned you have a junior, so they're graduating in 2026. And when you fill out financial aid in 2025, which will be this year in the fall, you're going to use 2024 taxes, which are essentially 2024 is already done. So you don't have a lot of ability to adjust it anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, so parents of sophomores, are going to be using 2025. So you still have time to adjust it. And parents of freshmen are going to be using 2026. So you've got a little time. And that's why I think a lot of people don't realize, because of the look back, a lot of that planning does have to happen freshman, sophomore year, not delay it till, the last minute and then realize, oh, there's woulda, coulda, shoulda, but didn't.
Right. Yeah. You have 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
You said 2 are in college. 1 is in high school. Would you mind sharing what decisions you made in terms of, did they go to state school? Did they go out of state? Was it really based on their passions? I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal experience going through the process as a parent and somebody with this great background.
Yep. Yeah. So my oldest is going to graduate this May. He was very focused, like your daughter. He was an engineer from about 14. It was pretty clear, maybe not exactly engineering, maybe physics or something, but we knew it was STEM, math, science, and he's graduating with a chemical engineering degree. And my wife is in education. So we have something called tuition exchange. So we actually have an unfair advantage in that there's opportunities for our kids to go to partner schools at a reduced rate. So he found schools that he liked on that list and picked the one that was a good fit for him. And he was a go-getter. He was willing to look around, and he's a 7-hour drive away. His net was pretty wide. My next son was, a little more of a homebody and not interested in doing what his big brother did. So he goes to where mom teaches.
Nice.
And tuition 0 where mom teaches. So the price was right. We're not going to argue with him.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of students out there, just kind of an anecdotal evidence. There's a lot of students out there that say, well, I don't want to go so close to home. And it's like, well, I see and interact with my son that's 20 minutes away a lot less than the kid that's 7 hours away. He just, he's living his life and he's happy and he'll answer the phone when we call and that kind of stuff. But he's, if we don't encourage him, it's not like he comes home every weekend or anything like that. He may as well be a 7-hour drive away because, he doesn't want to come home and we're not going to make him. So, you don't have to go far away to spread your wings is the point, I guess. My youngest is a senior in high school. So we have applications out. She's been accepted to 5 or 6 schools. We're still waiting to see where the numbers come in. She's also shopping on the list, but we'll see. And she applied to schools that are even further away, but some that are very close to home too. So she hasn't quite figured out. She's, kind of that undecided kid that we've been talking about where, some kids are very focused. The other, so I've had both. The engineer focused STEM kid and my daughter who's, thinking about an undergrad and then law. So we'll see. She's not, I don't know for certain that law is what she wants, but that's a path she chose, at least to start. It could change. So we'll see. And I think many parents realize that. Anybody that's had multiple kids, all of a sudden it's like, well, when it comes to this kid was no problem and this kid was a big problem. And, which kids were the party years in high school? Which kids were the, ones that did their homework without ever being told to? And which ones did you have to babysit constantly? So again, kids are different. College process will be different potentially as well.
Yeah. What I'm really hearing and taking away is that the process can be very complicated, depending on where your child wants to go to school. If they want to go close to home, it may be easier to plan some of that, right? Maybe they can live at home, or depending on it, like if being in Los Angeles, it would be really expensive for her to get an apartment somewhere. There's not enough housing either here. So, so there'd be different options depending on what your child just decides to do in terms of, are they staying in state? Are they staying close to home? Are they going really far away? In other countries, undergrad is 3 years instead of 4 in some cases. So all these different nuances that are woven into how we make these decisions. So what I'm really hearing is that everybody should be listening to your podcast and going to your website to see all your resources. You have courses, you have workshops, right? Seminars that you hold on a regular basis.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Right. And lots of so the EFC, or excuse me, change now. I keep using the old words, but SAI calculator. So you can calculate your need-based aid. There's the cost of colleges by state. So you can look up some numbers for your particular state. And there's a resources tab right on the website. So you can grab all the stuff. And there's a podcast. You can sign up for our newsletter. I've launched a course where we will help you through the process. And then lots of people just, call and work with me directly. You can reach me through the website there and schedule an appointment to see if we're a good fit for you and kind of go from there.
Yeah. And we'll have the links in the show notes for everybody. Make it really easy for everyone to find if they're in a situation where they're starting to think about their child's future education, right? Or they're in the midst of everything like I am right now. So, Brad, this has been really engaging for me, at least. I hope it was for you too. But I love all of the insights that you shared. I know I got a real education today, and I'm sure that my audience did as well. I know a lot of them are in the same boat as me. Maybe they have one in university, they have one still at home. The mixes are all over the place. But I think the more information we're armed with, the better. So you've given us so much great advice. I want to turn and ask you, do you have a favorite quote, a mantra, words of wisdom, a verse, a family motto, words that help you get through every day or that inspire you to keep on offering this wealth of information to family?
Yeah. I mean, something that I repeat to my kids and repeat relatively often is that, Henry Ford's quote, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. So, just believing that there's a way through this process is helpful versus if you're already given up before you even started. I think for a lot of families that makes it even more challenging. And then from if I'm giving parents advice, then the quote would be, Nike, just do it. You've got to, for a lot of families, they don't know where to start, and there is no official way to start, but go visit a couple colleges. Go to my website, start listening to some podcasts. It's a process. It's not something you're going to figure out on one Sunday afternoon. It's going to be many Sunday afternoons of dealing with colleges and visits and testing and working with your school counselors. And the sooner you start, the more spread out it can be and the less stressful it will be. I mean, you pay for college with time, money, and stress. And our goal is to help you with all three of those things where we can.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. And thank you to everybody who is listening to this episode or watching it on your favorite platform. This is one of those episodes where I am going to go back and listen to it, not just to listen to it and think about how the interview went, but to get all of the information. And again, also your website, your podcast is now on my list. So I just really appreciate the wealth of information again and all of the different types of resources you're offering to meet parents where they're at.
Right. Yeah. So everything's at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com.
Fantastic. And I'll be back again with another amazing guest to share their story, their journey, and some insights for you in the next few days. Have a great day, a great weekend, whenever you're listening to this episode. Brad, hope that the weather gets better for you. Yeah. Certainly wishing the same for me, even though it's a little warmer here.
Yeah. So it can't help but get better. It's pretty bad today.
Yeah. All right. And with that, thank you to everybody again for being in our audience today.
Disclosures. The information provided to you today is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be specific recommendations or advice. Please consult with a qualified professional before acting on any of this material. Investing involves risk. Depending on the types of investments, there may be varying degrees of risk. Investors should be prepared to bear loss, including total loss of principal. 529 College Savings Plan Disclosures. Investors should carefully consider investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. This information and other important information are contained in the fund prospectuses, summary prospectuses, and the 529 product program description. These documents can be obtained from a financial professional or directly from the plan's website. Please read them carefully before investing. Depending on your state of residence, there may be an in-state plan that offers tax and other benefits, which may include financial aid, scholarship funds, and protection from creditors. Before investing in any state's 529 plan, investors should consult a tax professional. If withdrawals from 529 plans are used for purposes other than qualified education, the withdrawal could be subject to a 10% federal tax penalty, state penalties, federal income tax, and state income tax. Brad Baldridge's disclosures. Brad Baldridge is a registered representative with Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad Baldridge is also an investment advisor representative with Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions are affiliated. Cambridge and the Baldridge companies are not affiliated. The registered branch location is 2810 South Calhoun Road, New Berlin, Wisconsin, 53151.
Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.